The insectoid Iridians' mandibles clicked as they feasted on the corpses of the Galactic Council diplomats, the clicking echoing through the council chamber. For centuries, the ruthless Iridians had swarmed across the galaxy, overwhelming world after world, slaughtering billions. Iridian armies smashed through planetary defenses with waves of expendable cloned soldiers and swarms of self-replicating war machines. Their hive-minded soldiers felt no fear, no mercy, no remorse. Trillions of Iridians poured from the birthing chambers of their conquered worlds, an unending tide of carapaced killers united in singular purpose: devour every other civilization. The Galactic Council had tried to stop them. They had assembled grand alliances and mighty fleets to confront the Iridian menace, but each time the Iridians had shattered their ranks, turning allied species against each other and feasting on the remains. Now, the Galactic Council was broken, most of its members dead or enslaved in Iridian hives. Only one hope remained: humanity. As a young species, humans had only recently achieved interstellar travel, but already tales of human soldiers' tenacity and valor were spreading through the remains of the Council. Jake Jones, human mercenary and ex-soldier, strode through the corridors of the Council headquarters, his boots tramping through pooled green ichor leaking from mangled insectoid corpses. The few surviving councillors, their robes of office torn and blood-stained, waited for him in the shattered remains of their chamber. They had a mission for him, one last desperate chance to save the galaxy. Jake had to infiltrate the Iridian homeworld, discover the source of their power, and destroy it, no matter the cost. The survival of every free species hinged on his success. If he failed, the Iridians would descend on Earth, humanity's homeworld, and finish their conquest. Jake's jaw clenched as he marched towards the council chamber and the impossible task before him. The Iridians had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, but they had never faced humanity. Jake would show them the fury of Earth as he brought their empire crashing down. He would remind the galaxy why humans should be feared. Jake's boots crunched on the rocky ground as he stepped out of his concealed ship onto the bleak surface of Iridia. The planet's dim red sun hung low on the horizon, casting an eerie crimson glow across the barren landscape. Jake scanned his surroundings, his hand resting on the pulse pistol at his hip. He had to stay alert. On Iridia, danger could strike from anywhere. A cloaked figure emerged from behind a jagged boulder, its features obscured. Jake tensed, ready for a fight, but the figure raised its hands in a gesture of peace. "Jake Jones?" the figure asked, its voice a rasping whisper. "I am Primus. We must hurry. It is not safe out in the open." Jake followed Primus into a hidden canyon, the walls rising up on either side like the ribcage of some long-dead beast. "I risked much to contact you," Primus said. "But you must know, the Iridians are preparing for their greatest conquest yet. They have developed a new weapon, one capable of annihilating entire star systems." Jake's blood ran cold. He had seen the devastation the Iridians could unleash firsthand. The thought of them wielding a weapon of such destructive power was chilling. "How do we stop them?" he asked. "Come," Primus urged. "There are others you must meet." Primus led Jake deeper into the canyon, to a camouflage door set into the rock face. The door slid open, revealing a dimly lit tunnel. They followed it into a large cavern, where a ragtag group of aliens huddled around a flickering hologram. "Brothers and sisters," Primus addressed the group. "This is Jake Jones, the human warrior sent by the Galactic Council. He has come to aid our cause." The aliens eyed Jake warily. He recognized a few of their species: a hulking Krodax, an agile Lyrian, a brilliant-plumed Avia, all species that had suffered under Iridian rule. "If we are to defeat the Iridians, we must understand their technology," a voice said. A tall, blue-skinned alien stepped forward, his eyes glinting with intelligence. "I am Dr. Zoran. For years I have studied the Iridians' weapons, searching for weaknesses, and I believe I have found one." Dr. Zoran manipulated the hologram, zooming in on a schematic of an Iridian warship. Every Iridian vessel, from their smallest scout ship to their largest battle cruiser, is controlled by a central AI core. If we could infiltrate their command ship and inject a virus into that core, we could disable their entire fleet. Jake leaned forward, studying the schematic. A plan began to take shape in his mind. It would be risky, perhaps even suicidal. But if it worked, it could turn the tide of the war. "To get to that core, we'll need the plans for their new weapon," Jake said. "We need to know what we're up against. I can infiltrate their central command and steal those plans, but I'll need a diversion." The assembled aliens exchanged glances, a grim determination settling over them. They had lost their homeworlds, their families, everything to the Iridians. They were ready to fight back, no matter the cost. Jake felt a fierce pride kindling in his chest. The Iridians thought they had crushed all resistance, that the galaxy would fall before them like ripe fruit. But they had never faced a force like this before, a united front of species with nothing left to lose. The Iridians were about to learn the true meaning of human tenacity, and Jake would be the one to teach it to them, even if it meant laying down his own life. For Earth, for the Galactic Council, for every species that yearned to be free, he would fight. And he would win. Jake's heart pounded as he crept through the dimly lit corridors of the Iridian Central Command, his stolen armor clicking softly with each careful step. Primus's intel had been good. The rebels' diversion had drawn away most of the facility's guards, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. But even so, Jake knew he couldn't let his guard down. One wrong move, and the entire mission would be blown. He paused at an intersection, pressing himself flat against the wall, as a pair of Iridian soldiers marched past, their mandibles clacking as they conversed in their harsh, guttural language. Jake strained his ears, trying to make out their words. His Iridian was rusty, but he caught enough to make his blood run cold. "Ganju weapon, ready for deployment, entire star system, enslaved populations, labor camps." The soldiers moved on, unaware of the human intruder in their midst. Jake let out a slow breath, his grip tightening on his pulse rifle. The stakes were even higher than he had realized. The Iridians weren't just planning to conquer the galaxy, they intended to subjugate every living being, to crush them beneath their chitinous heels. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Jake couldn't fail, he wouldn't. He pushed on, navigating the labyrinthine corridors until he reached the central database. The massive circular room thrummed with energy, the walls lined with pulsing data cores. Jake hurried to the nearest terminal, his fingers flying over the holographic interface as he searched for the weapon plans. Come on, he muttered, his eyes scanning the streams of data. There, a file labeled Project Devourer. That had to be it. Jake initiated the download, watching with bated breath as the progress bar crawled across the screen. Just a little longer. The doors to the database room hissed open. Jake spun, pulse rifle at the ready, but he was too late. An Iridian commander strode into the room, flanked by a pair of heavily armed guards. The commander's compound eyes narrowed as he took in Jake's human features beneath the stolen helmet. Well, the commander clicked, mandibles twisting into a cruel approximation of a smile. What have we here? A little human spy, worming his way into the heart of our operation. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle. Behind him, the terminal beeped softly, signaling the completed download. He had what he needed. Now, he just had to get out alive. "You're too late," Jake said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I have the plans. The galaxy will know the truth about your new weapon. They'll unite against you." The commander laughed, a harsh chittering sound. "Foolish human. You think a few stolen plans can stop us? We are the Iridians. We are unstoppable. And now you will die." The guards leveled their weapons at Jake, preparing to fire. Jake tensed, ready to make his move. This was it. Do or die. For Earth. For the galaxy. For freedom. He dove to the side just as the guards opened fire, pulse bolts sizzling through the air where he had stood a moment before. Jake rolled, came up firing, his shots taking the first guard in the chest. The Iridian crumpled, ichor spurting from the wounds. The second guard charged, razor-sharp talons slashing. Jake ducked under the blow, rammed the butt of his rifle into the Iridian's midsection. The guard doubled over, and Jake brought the rifle down on the back of his head with a sickening crunch. That left only the commander. The Iridian leader snarled, drawing a wicked-looking plasma blade from his belt. The weapon hummed with deadly energy as the commander advanced, his eyes glittering with malice. Jake backed away, pulse rifle at the ready. He knew he only had one chance. The commander was fast, too fast. If Jake missed, it was all over. The Iridian lunged, plasma blade slashing down. Jake twisted aside, the searing heat of the blade singing his armor. He brought his rifle up, point blank against the commander's chest, and pulled the trigger. The pulse bolt punched through the commander's armor like it was paper, burning a fist-sized hole right through him. The Iridian staggered back, mandibles clicking weakly, before he collapsed to the floor in a pool of spreading ichor. Jake stood over the fallen commander, breathing hard. He had done it, he had the plans, but there was no time to celebrate. Alarms began to blare throughout the facility, a harsh klaxon that set Jake's teeth on edge. The Iridians knew they had been breached. They would be coming for him. Jake retrieved the data drive from the terminal and sprinted for the door, pulse rifle at the ready. He had to get back to Primus and the others, had to get these plans to the Galactic Council. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. As he ran through the corridors, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind him, Jake allowed himself a grim smile. The Iridians thought they were unstoppable. They thought the galaxy was theirs for the taking. But they had never faced Jake Jones, and they had no idea what humanity was capable of. Jake burst out of the facility into the harsh red sunlight of Iridia, pulse bolts sizzling past him as the Iridian guards opened fire. He ran, zigzagging to avoid their shots, his stolen armor clanking with each pounding step. Primus was waiting for him at the rendezvous point, the rebel fighters tense and ready. Jake leaped into their waiting hovercraft, the plans clutched tightly to his chest. "Go!" he yelled, and the craft leaped forward, engines roaring. Pulse bolts hammered into the hull, but the rebel tech held, the craft's shields absorbing the worst of the barrage. As they rocketed away from the facility, the Iridian command center receding behind them, Jake allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had struck a blow against the Iridians today, had ripped away a piece of their aura of invincibility. But the fight was far from over. The Iridians would be coming for them now, with all the fury of the hive. And Jake and his allies would need every ounce of courage and cunning they possessed to stand against the coming storm. But for now they had hope, and sometimes hope was the most powerful weapon of all. Jake circled the Iridian commander, pulse rifle leveled at the alien's chest. The commander's compound eyes glittered with malice as he twirled his plasma blade, the weapon humming with deadly energy. They lunged at each other, Jake rolling under the commander's slash and coming up firing. The pulse bolt seared into the Iridian's armor, leaving charred holes, but the commander kept coming. Jake ducked and weaved, using his smaller size and agility to stay one step ahead of the Iridian's brutal attacks. The plasma blade sang through the air, missing Jake's head by inches. Jake fired again, the pulse bolts stitching a line across the commander's chest. The Iridian staggered but didn't fall. With a roar of fury, he charged, plasma blade raised for a killing blow. Jake waited until the last second, then sidestepped, the searing blade passing so close he could feel its heat through his armor. He rammed the butt of his rifle into the commander's midsection, doubling the Iridian over, then brought the weapon down on the back of his head with a crack. The commander crumpled, ichor leaking from his shattered exoskeleton. Jake stood over him, breathing hard, his armor scorched and dented. He had won, but at a cost. Pain lanced through his side where a lucky slash from the plasma blade had found a gap in his armor. Blood soaked his undersuit, the wound burning like fire. There was no time to rest. More Iridians would be coming. Jake staggered out of the facility, clutching the data drive with the stolen weapon plans. Each step sent fresh agony shooting through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on. He had to get this intel back to the rebels. The hovercraft was waiting at the rendezvous point, Primus at the controls. Jake half fell into the passenger seat, blood pooling beneath him. "You're hurt," Primus said, his voice thick with concern. "I'll live," Jake grunted. "Just get us out of here." The hovercraft roared away, pulse bolts from the pursuing Iridians hammering into its shields. Jake slumped in his seat, the data drive clutched to his chest. They had struck a blow against the Iridians today, but at a steep price. Back at the rebel base, Dr. Zoran pored over the stolen weapon plans. His blue skin furrowed in concentration. Jake lay on a cot nearby, his wounds bandaged but still burning with pain. "This weapon," Dr. Zoran said, his voice tight, "it's like nothing I've ever seen. The power source, it's something called iridium, an element so rare and unstable, it's almost mythical." Jake pushed himself up on his elbows, ignoring the stabbing pain in his side. "Iridium, where does it come from?" "Only a handful of planets in the known galaxy. The Iridians must have found a way to mine and refine it." Dr. Zoran looked up, his eyes meeting Jake's. "If we could find and destroy their iridium supply—" "We could stop them from finishing this weapon," Jake finished. "Cut off their conquest at the knees." Dr. Zoran nodded. "But it won't be easy. The Iridians will have those mining operations locked down tight, and we don't have the firepower to take them head on." Jake swung his legs off the cot, standing with a wince. An idea was forming in his mind, a desperate, dangerous plan, but it might be their only chance. "We don't need firepower," he said. "We need precision, skill. I know some people, human mercs and spec ops types, the best of the best. If I can convince them to join us, to hit those mining operations with surgical strikes—" Primus stepped forward, his eyes glinting with hope. "It could work, it's a chance at least, more than we had before." Jake nodded, his jaw set. It was a slim hope, a fragile thread to hang the fate of the galaxy on, but it was all they had. "Get me a comlink," he said, his voice grim. "Let's start making some calls, we've got a galaxy to save." Jake's wounds were still fresh as he stood before the holographic display, the blue light casting his face in sharp relief. The Galactic Council, their images flickering above the projector, had just given their approval for his plan. It was a desperate gambit, but it was the only chance they had. "I'll need the best of the best," Jake said, his voice still rough with pain. "Soldiers with the skills and experience to take the fight to the Iridians." The councillors nodded, their expressions grim. They knew the stakes, knew that failure would mean the enslavement of the entire galaxy. "You'll have them," the human councillor said. "Whatever resources you need, they're yours." Jake nodded his thanks, then turned to Primus and Dr. Zoran. "Time to start making some calls." The first to arrive was Sergeant Max Dugan, a mountain of a man with a face like weathered stone. He had a reputation as one of the toughest soldiers in the galaxy, a man who had never met a battle he couldn't win. "I heard you're putting together a team," Dugan said, his voice a low rumble. "Count me in, I've been itching to give the Iridians a good kick in the ass." Next was Lieutenant Olivia Chen, her lithe form moving with the grace of a dancer. But Jake knew that beneath that delicate exterior was a mind like a steel trap, capable of cracking even the most complex security systems. "The Iridians think their networks are unbreakable," Chen said, a sly smile playing at her lips. "Let's show them just how wrong they are." Last to join was Corporal Liam Mackenzie, a lean, wiry man with eyes like chips of ice. He carried a sniper rifle with the ease of long familiarity, the weapon as much a part of him as his own limbs. "I can put a bullet through an Iridian's eye from a kilometer away," Mackenzie said, his voice a soft brogue. "Just point me at the target." Jake looked at his team, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They were the best of the best, each one a master of their craft. With them at his side, he knew they could do the impossible. "Let's get to work," he said, his voice ringing with determination. "We've got some iridium mines to hit." The first strike came without warning, a swift and brutal assault on an Iridian mining operation on the planet Zaraxis. Jake and his team moved like ghosts, striking from the shadows and fading away before the Iridians could react. Chen worked her magic on the facility's security systems, shutting down alarms and opening doors for the rest of the team. Dugan and Mackenzie were the hammer to her scalpel, smashing through Iridian defenses with brute force and precision aim. Jake was the tip of the spear, his pulse rifle spitting death as he led the charge into the heart of the facility. The Iridians, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, fell before them like wheat before a scythe. In a matter of minutes, the mine was in ruins, its vital equipment destroyed, and its iridium stores detonated. As the team made their escape, the sky above Zaraxis lit up with the glow of secondary explosions, a testament to the thoroughness of their work. News of the raid spread like wildfire, whispers of the humans' bravery and skill passing from one subjugated world to the next. On a dozen planets, downtrodden species looked to the stars with newfound hope, the seeds of rebellion taking root in their hearts. The Iridians, their arrogance shaken by this new and unexpected threat, lashed out with all the fury of a wounded beast. But Jake and his team were always one step ahead, striking and fading like smoke on the wind. With each successful raid, the Iridians grew more desperate, their tactics more brutal. They clamped down hard on their slave populations, determined to crush any hint of dissent. But it was too late. The spark of rebellion had been lit, and no amount of force could extinguish it now. Across the galaxy, the downtrodden rose up against their masters, fighting with the courage of those who had nothing left to lose. The Iridians, their forces stretched thin and their iridium supplies dwindling, could only watch as their empire crumbled around them. But Jake knew that the fight was far from over. The Iridians were still a formidable foe, and they would not go down easily. As long as they possessed even a single ounce of iridium, they remained a threat to the galaxy. He gathered his team once more, their faces lit by the glow of the holographic display. The image it showed was of a planet, a world wrapped in the purple haze of iridium mines. "This is Iridius Prime," Jake said, his voice grim, "the heart of the Iridian Empire and the source of their iridium. If we can take it out, we can end this war once and for all." The others nodded, their expressions set with determination. They knew the risks, knew that this would be their most dangerous mission yet, but they also knew that it was a risk they had to take. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of every species that yearned to be free, they would fight, and they would win. The Iridian counterattack came without warning, a tidal wave of plasma fire and swarming soldiers that crashed against the rebel base like a hammer blow. Jake and his team were in the command center, poring over maps of the Iridians' fortifications, when the first explosions rocked the base. "We've got incoming," Sergeant Dugan yelled, his voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. "Iridians, a whole damn army of them." Jake was already moving, pulse rifle in hand, barking orders as he ran. "Chen, lock down our systems. Mackenzie, get to high ground and start picking them off. Dugan, with me. We need to buy time for the evacuation." The base was in chaos, rebel fighters scrambling to mount a defense against the overwhelming Iridian force. Plasma bolts filled the air, the stench of ozone and burnt flesh choking the corridors. Jake and Dugan fought their way to the front lines, taking down Iridians with precise bursts of pulse fire. But for every Iridian they killed, a dozen more seemed to take their place. The rebels were outnumbered and outgunned, and Jake knew they couldn't hold out for long. "Fall back," he yelled, his voice hoarse from shouting over the din of battle. "Get to the transports, we need to evacuate now." The rebels began a fighting retreat, giving ground grudgingly as they made their way to the waiting ships. Jake and his team formed the rear guard, laying down covering fire to keep the Iridians at bay. Suddenly a panicked voice crackled over the comm. "Dr. Zoran is missing. He was in the labs when the attack hit." Jake's blood ran cold. The Iridians must have taken the scientist during the chaos of the battle. Without Dr. Zoran, they had no hope of stopping the Iridian superweapon. "Primus, take a squad and search the base," Jake ordered. "We can't leave without him." But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The Iridians were closing in, their weapons' fire growing closer with each passing second. They had to leave now, or none of them would make it out alive. With a heavy heart, Jake gave the order to evacuate. The rebels boarded the transports, the ship's engines roaring to life as they lifted off from the burning base. As they streaked away into the sky, Jake watched the Iridian forces swarm over the ruins of the rebel stronghold like a horde of insects. They had escaped, but at a terrible cost. Dr. Zoran was in the hands of the Iridians, and without him, the galaxy was doomed. Jake slammed his fist against the bulkhead, his frustration and anger boiling over. "We have to get him back," he growled. "We can't let the Iridians win." "We will," Dugan said, his voice steady with conviction. "We'll find him, and we'll make the Iridians pay for what they've done." The transports docked with a rebel frigate in orbit, and Jake and his team began planning their next move. They had lost the battle, but the war was far from over. "The Iridians will have taken Dr. Zoran to one of their research facilities," Chen said, her fingers flying over the ship's scanners. "If we can find out where, we can mount a rescue mission." "It won't be easy," Mackenzie warned. "The Iridians will have that place locked down tighter than a Klaxian's purse strings." "We've faced worse odds before," Jake said, his eyes hard with determination. "And we'll face them again for Dr. Zoran, and for every species in the galaxy that's counting on us." They spent the next few days gathering intelligence, piecing together scraps of information from intercepted Iridian transmissions and rebel spy networks. Finally, they had a target, a heavily guarded research station in the heart of Iridian territory. Jake and his team, along with a hand-picked squad of rebel commandos led by Primus, geared up for the mission. They knew the risks, knew that many of them might not come back, but they also knew that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. They struck the facility like lightning, using stealth and guile to infiltrate its defenses. Once inside, they fought their way through waves of Iridian guards, their weapons spitting fire and death. They found Dr. Zoran in a heavily secured lab, bruised and battered but alive. The Iridians had been forcing him to work on their superweapon, using torture and coercion to break his will. "I knew you would come," the scientist said, his voice weak but filled with relief. "I knew you wouldn't leave me here." "We never leave a man behind," Jake said, helping Dr. Zoran to his feet. "Now let's get out of here and blow this place to hell." They fought their way back out of the facility, planting explosives as they went. The Iridians threw everything they had at them, but the rebels were unstoppable, driven by a fierce determination to succeed. As they made their escape, the sky lit up with the glow of the exploding research station, a towering fireball that consumed the Iridian installation. It was a victory, but a costly one. Many of the rebel commandos had fallen in the fighting, including Primus. Jake felt the weight of their sacrifice heavy on his shoulders, a burden he would carry for the rest of his days. But he also knew that they had struck a blow against the Iridians, had shown them that the galaxy would not submit quietly to their rule. Back on the rebel frigate, Dr. Zoran revealed what he had learned during his captivity. The Iridian superweapon was nearly complete, housed in a massive fortress deep in their territory. It was the most heavily defended installation in the galaxy, a bastion of Iridian might. "We have to destroy it," Jake said, his voice grim. "It's the only way to stop the Iridians once and for all." The others nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew it was a suicide mission, that their chances of success were slim. But they also knew that they had no choice. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of every species that yearned for freedom, they would fight, and they would win or die trying. The galaxy held its breath as the rebel fleet assembled, a patchwork of ships from across the stars. Every vessel that could fight was called to arms, from the sleek frigates of the Galactic Council to the battered freighters of the rebel factions. At the head of the fleet, Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes hard with determination. He knew the odds were against them, knew that many of the brave souls under his command would not survive the coming battle. But he also knew that they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales. With a final nod to his crew, Jake gave the order to jump. The rebel fleet leaped into hyperspace, streaking across the stars towards the heart of Iridian territory. They emerged from the jump, mere clicks from the installation, its massive bulk looming before them like a malevolent god. The Iridians had been waiting for them, and the space around the installation was thick with their ships. The battle was joined in a heartbeat, the void lighting up with the flare of weapons fire and the glow of exploding ships. Jake and his team fought their way through the chaos, weaving between enemy ships and blasting any that got in their way. The Iridians outnumbered them 10-1, but the rebels fought with the desperate fury of those who had nothing left to lose. They pushed forward, driving a wedge through the Iridian defenses until they reached the installation itself. Leaving the rest of the fleet to keep the Iridians occupied, Jake and his team boarded the installation. They fought their way through the corridors, the air thick with the stench of ozone and death. Max mowed down scores of Iridian soldiers with his plasma minigun, while Olivia sliced through their defenses with her hacking tools. Liam picked off key targets with his sniper rifle, his aim unwavering even in the midst of the chaos. At last, they reached the control room for the superweapon. The door slid open to reveal the Overmind itself, a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine that towered over them like a mountain. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as it spoke, its voice a grating shriek that made their bones vibrate. "Foolish humans," it hissed. "You think you can stop us? We are the Iridians, the masters of the galaxy. This weapon is but the beginning of our plans. We will use it to exterminate all other forms of life, to reshape the universe in our image." Jake felt a chill run down his spine at the Overmind's words. He had known the Iridians were ruthless, but this was beyond even his worst nightmares. He raised his pulse rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Not on my watch," he growled. "We end this now." The team opened fire, pouring everything they had into the Overmind. The creature shrieked in rage, lashing out with tendrils of energy that sliced through armor like paper. Jake and his team fought back with grim determination, dodging and weaving as they unleashed a hail of fire on the Overmind. The battle was long and grueling, a desperate struggle against a foe that seemed to shrug off even the most devastating of blows. But Jake and his team refused to give up, refused to let the Iridians win. They fought with every ounce of skill and courage they possessed, pushing themselves beyond the limits of human endurance. In the end, it was Liam who dealt the final blow. With a crack of thunder, his sniper rifle barked and a high-explosive round punched through the Overmind's skull. The creature convulsed, its scream of agony shaking the very foundations of the installation. Then, with a final shudder, it collapsed, its massive bulk crashing to the floor in a heap of twisted flesh and metal. As the battle raged on, Jake heard Dr. Zoran's voice crackle over the comm. "Jake, I have something that can help. A secret weapon I've been working on. It can disrupt the Iridians' hive mind, cut them off from the Overmind." Jake ducked as a blast of energy sizzled over his head. "Do it, Doc. Whatever you've got, use it now." Dr. Zoran's fingers flew over the control panel, inputting the final commands. "I just need a little more time." Jake gritted his teeth. "We'll buy you as much as we can. Max, Olivia, Liam, form up on me. We need to keep these bastards off the Doc's back." The team fell in around Jake, their weapons spitting fire as they formed a protective circle around Dr. Zoran. The Iridians pressed in from all sides, their eyes glowing with the Overmind's malevolent influence. "Almost there," Dr. Zoran muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Just a few more seconds." With a final triumphant keystroke, Dr. Zoran activated the device. A pulse of energy surged out from the control panel, washing over the Iridian soldiers like a tidal wave. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Iridians stumbled and reeled as their connection to the hive mind was severed. Some clutched at their heads, screaming in agony as their minds were suddenly their own again. Others turned on each other in confusion and fear, firing wildly into the ranks of their own comrades. Even the Overmind itself was not immune to the effects of Dr. Zoran's weapon. The massive creature shuddered and convulsed, its mental grip on its soldiers weakening with each passing second. Jake saw his chance. "Hit it now," he yelled. "Everything we've got." The team opened fire, pouring every ounce of firepower they had into the Overmind. The creature shrieked in pain and rage, its tentacles lashing out in a desperate attempt to defend itself, but it was too weak, too disoriented to put up an effective fight. Sergeant Dugan stepped forward, a cluster of high-yield explosives clutched in his hands. "This one's for Primus," he growled, "and for every poor bastard these fuckers have ever hurt." With a roar of defiance, Dugan charged forward, ignoring the Overmind's flailing tentacles and the searing heat of its energy blasts. He leaped onto the creature's back, planting the explosives directly into its pulsing, fleshy hide. "Fire in the hole!" Dugan yelled, diving clear just as the explosives detonated. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave of heat and light and sound that slammed into Jake like a physical blow. He was thrown backwards, his ears ringing and his vision swimming. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was alive or dead. But as the smoke cleared, Jake saw that the Overmind was gone, reduced to a smouldering crater of charred flesh and twisted metal. The Iridian soldiers, those that were still alive, were in full retreat, their will to fight shattered along with their hive mind. Jake stumbled to his feet, his head pounding and his body aching from a dozen wounds. But as he looked around at his team, at Dr. Zoran, at the shattered remains of the Iridian installation, he felt a sense of triumph welling up inside him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had beaten the Iridians and saved the galaxy from their tyranny. The war was finally over. But even as the thought crossed Jake's mind, he knew that the fight was far from finished. There would be other threats, other challenges to face in the days and years to come. But for now, in this moment of victory, he allowed himself a small, weary smile. They had won, and that was enough. The dust settled on the shattered remains of the Iridian installation. Jake stood amid the rubble, his armor battered and scorched, his pulse rifle still smoking in his hands. Around him, the surviving members of his team tended to their wounds and checked their gear, the adrenaline of battle slowly fading from their systems. In the days that followed, the Galactic Council and the rebel factions worked tirelessly to dismantle the Iridian Empire piece by piece. The surviving Iridians, their hive mind broken and their armies scattered, offered little resistance. The Council took charge of the Iridian territories, installing new governments and placing the Iridians themselves under close supervision to prevent any future uprisings. Jake and his team were summoned before the Council, where they were hailed as heroes of the galaxy. They stood tall and proud as they were awarded the highest honors for their bravery and sacrifice, the medals gleaming on their chests. But even as he accepted the accolades, Jake felt a hollow ache in his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about the friends he had lost, the comrades who had given their lives to make this victory possible. Sergeant Dugan's sacrifice weighed heavily on him. The grizzled veteran had been a constant presence at his side, a rock of stability in the chaos of war. Now he was gone, and Jake felt his absence like a physical wound. As the weeks turned into months, the galaxy began to rebuild. The scars of the Iridian occupation slowly faded, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Jake tried to move on, to find purpose in this new era of peace, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his work was unfinished, that there were still threats lurking in the shadows. One evening, as he sat alone in his quarters, a chime sounded at his door. Jake tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. He opened the door to find a cloaked figure standing in the hallway, their face hidden beneath a hood. "Commander Jake Sully?" the figure asked, their voice distorted by a modulator. "Who wants to know?" Jake growled, his fingers tightening on his weapon. The figure reached into their cloak and produced a data chip, holding it out to Jake. "I have information that you need to see. A new threat is emerging, one that could destroy everything you fought for." Jake hesitated for a moment before reaching out and taking the chip. "What kind of threat?" "A species from the depths of uncharted space," the figure replied. "More advanced and more powerful than even the Iridians. They've been watching your conflict from afar, and now they're preparing to make their move." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He slotted the data chip into his holoprojector and watched as a series of images and files flashed across the screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The mysterious species was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Their ships were massive and sleek, their weapons technology far beyond anything the Council had ever encountered. Jake knew in that moment that the galaxy was in danger once again, and that the humans would be needed to face this new and terrifying threat. He turned to thank the cloaked figure, but they were already gone, vanished into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Jake stood alone in his quarters, the weight of this new revelation heavy on his shoulders. He knew that he couldn't do this alone. He needed his team, needed the skills and courage of the men and women who had fought alongside him against the Iridians. Jake activated his comlink and began to make calls, rallying his troops for the battles to come. As he worked, Jake felt a new sense of purpose rising within him. The galaxy needed the humans once again, needed their strength and their indomitable will, and he would be there to lead them, to fight alongside them until the very end. The war might be over, but the fight was just beginning. Jake pored over the intelligence reports, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He had been working around the clock coordinating with the Galactic Council and the rebel factions to shore up their defenses against the new threat. He requisitioned ships, weapons, and supplies, poring over every scrap of data they had managed to gather on the mysterious enemy. But as the weeks turned into months with no sign of the enemy, Jake could feel the doubts beginning to creep in. The council members whispered behind his back, questioning whether the threat was real or just a figment of his imagination. Even his own team, the people who had fought and bled alongside him, began to give him concerned looks when they thought he wasn't looking. Jake pushed himself harder, burying himself in his work to drown out the nagging voices in his head. He spent long hours in the training room, honing his skills and pushing his body to the limit. He snapped at his friends and colleagues, pushing them away in his single-minded focus on the looming threat. Lieutenant Chen cornered him in the mess hall one day, her face etched with worry. "Jake, you need to take a break," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "You're running yourself into the ground. We're all worried about you." Jake shrugged off her touch, his eyes hard. "I can't afford to take a break," he growled. "Not when the enemy could strike at any moment. We have to be ready." Chen opened her mouth to argue, but Jake brushed past her, his mind already racing with the next task on his endless list. As the months dragged on, Jake's behavior grew more erratic. He lashed out at his team over minor mistakes, his temper growing shorter with each passing day. He retreated to his quarters for hours on end, poring over the same intelligence reports over and over again, searching for some clue he might have missed. When the enemy finally struck, it was without warning or mercy. The distress call came from a council outpost on the edge of controlled space, the panicked voice of the base commander filling the airwaves. "We're under attack," she shouted, her words nearly drowned out by the sound of explosions and screams. "Unknown enemy ships have breached our defenses. We need immediate assistance." Jake scrambled his team and raced to the outpost, his heart pounding in his chest. But when they arrived, they found themselves hopelessly outmatched. The enemy ships were unlike anything they had ever seen before, their sleek black hulls bristling with advanced weaponry. Jake and his team fought with everything they had, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. One by one, Jake's team fell around him, cut down by the enemy's relentless onslaught. Jake fought on, his pulse rifle blazing as he took down one enemy after another. But there were too many of them, and he could feel his strength beginning to wane. As the enemy ships filled the skies above the burning outpost, Jake felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He knew that he was going to die here, on this distant battlefield, light years from home. But in that moment, he also knew that his life had been building to this point, to this final stand against an implacable foe. With his last ounce of strength, Jake activated his comlink and sent a final message to the council. "Fall back," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get out of here while you still can. And when you rebuild, don't make the same mistakes we did. Find another way, a better way, or else this cycle of violence will never end." As the enemy's final barrage slammed into the outpost, Jake closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. His last thought was of his team, of the brave men and women who had fought and died alongside him. He hoped that their sacrifice would not be in vain, that their legacy would live on in the hearts and minds of those who came after. The galaxy would never be the same after the events of that fateful day. The Council, shaken by the devastating attack and the loss of one of their greatest heroes, struggled to regroup and rebuild. The mysterious enemy, having made their presence known in the most brutal way possible, retreated back into the shadows, leaving only questions and fear in their wake. But even in the midst of the chaos and uncertainty, there were those who remembered Jake's final words, his plea for a different path, and as the galaxy slowly began to heal, there were whispers of a new way forward, a path of peace and understanding that might finally break the cycle of war and destruction. Only time would tell if Jake's dream would become a reality, but for now his legacy lived on, a shining example of the courage and sacrifice that defined the best of humanity. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: the galaxy would never forget the name of Jake Sully, the hero who gave his life so that others might live. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.